we've got some healthy competition in the Democratic Party, but I've lost count how many Republicans are running for this job. They'll have enough for an actual Hunger Games. So that's that is an interesting bunch. I know some of them well. They're good people. It's just their ideas are bad. And I want to emphasize that. We're one country. We're all on one team. And so we're all one American family. Yeah, but we all go, we're at Thanksgiving, and Uncle Harry starts saying something, and you say, well, Uncle Harry, that makes no sense at all. You still love him. He's still a member of your family, right? But you got to correct him. You don't want to put him in charge of stuff. That's all I'm saying.
In related news, some guy named Uncle Harry did actually file papers to run for the Republican nomination. Actually, no, that's not true. I don't know. Probably somebody named Harry filed today. But in addition, Scott Walker did file his papers today. We know Scott Walker, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, is due to make his formal out-loud announcement that he's running on July 13th. But today, he filed with the FEC to say that he is going to join the race. So even less suspense than there already was. We also tonight can do a little more updating on our ginormous chart of the historically unprecedented overlarge Republican presidential field this year. Trademark. All of the people with the red background on our chart, they have all actually formally declared that they're running. We have 14 declared major candidates for the Republican nomination already. Anybody who has dotted lines around them, we know when they are going to declare, if they're going to declare. So, for example, Scott Walker here. Scott Walker, where's Scott Walker there? Oh, yeah, upper right-hand corner. He's got dotted lines around him because he's due to declare on July 13th. We can also now, finally, for the first time in a really long time, we can actually take somebody off this list. It is time to poof somebody off this list. Peter King. Peter King, the bombastic Republican congressman from New York State, had said that he would decide by now whether or not he was going to run. Peter King has just announced that he is not going to run for president. And so, Peter King, you become one of a very small number of Republicans this year who is announcing that he's not running for president. And therefore, you get poofed off this list. 3, 2, 1. Poof. Goodbye, Peter King. We haven't been able to take anybody off the list in a long time. But we do have one further change that we can make to the list tonight, and this is an interesting one. It's my boyfriend, former governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore, who's not really my boyfriend, but he does seem very nice. Governor Jim, I want him to come on the show. Governor Jim Gilmore has been a maybe on our list this whole time. Governor Gilmore ran for president in 2008. He was up there on the debate stage. He didn't win any states or anything, but he ran in 2008. He's been keeping his cards close to the vest as to whether or not he would run again this year. Well, Jim Gilmore's office told us today that Governor Gilmore will make his decision about whether or not he is running on or about August 6th. And if that date is in your mind for some other reason, it's because August 6th, Jim Gilmore is waiting until the day of the first Republican presidential debate to decide whether or not he is running. Which I guess means if that debate goes completely off the rails like everybody expects it to because of the format, because of who they're letting in and who they're excluding, Jim Gilmore might very well take that occasion to jump in and save the day and claim the Republican presidential nomination that is obviously and rightfully his. So we've got a dotted line around Jim Gilmore now, August 6th. We know that Scott Walker's getting in on July 13th. We know Peter King is not running, very sad. There's still stuff happening on the Republican side of the field, even at this late date. On the Democratic side of the field, though, there is also some action. And we had a little bit of a heads up yesterday that this might happen. Here's how that went at our news meeting yesterday for this show.
Jim Webb says he's going to decide in 3 days.
For his bunker.
I gotta go get him here.
Yeah.
That was yesterday. Jim Webb saying that he would announce in a few days whether or not he was going to run for president. But he didn't wait a few days. Today, he announced, boom, throw yourself into the closet, get on the air. That was not an earthquake, that was the Web-mentum. Jim Webb is now declared as of a blog post on his webpage. And so now we know the character of the Democratic field, right? Republican field still taking shape. We know the debate stage on the Democratic side is going to be this group of these 5 friendly older white people who could all fit in a small family sedan. Jim Webb is the 5th one to declare, probably the last one to declare. If you're intrigued by the Jim Webb announcement today, though, and you are looking today to find out more information about him, this Jim Webb who's going to run for president, you might have run into some trouble trying to find that information because of the way information about him is organized on the internet machine. If you go to jimwebb.com, what you'll find is a very nicely organized, very well-designed website for a man named Jim Webb, who is not the same Jim Webb who is running for president. This Jim Webb, in fact, does website design, and very well. If you decided to get more specific and put in jimwebb2016.com, that website is apparently nothing. It's just a GoDaddy holder page. So then if you really wanted to get very, very literal and you want to go to jimwebb4president.com, that was my next guest. Turns out jimwebb4president.com redirects immediately to ChineseBachelors.com, which my work, I kid you not, my work computer will not allow me to visit, much like the garden rooftop setting where Chris Hayes was tonight. I'm not allowed to go. So I had to actually go to this redirect site, ChineseBachelors.com. I had to go on my phone. Now I'm afraid to use my phone to call my mother. So that is not great for Jim Webb, right? That all the obvious things you would choose as your campaign website go either nowhere or to an unrelated business or to ChineseBachelors.com. I mean, it's not maybe quite as bad as JebBushForPresident.com going to a gay rights discussion website set up by CJ and Charlie, the cute tech bears from Portland, Oregon, who we had as guests on this show. That's JebBushForPresident.com. Jim Webb's predicament is probably also not as bad as TedCruz.com, which still to this day reads, support President Obama, immigration reform now. That's TedCruz.com. But JimWebbForPresident.com going to ChineseBachelors.com, it's right up there. JimWebb.com being a web design, it's right up there. The other thing going on that's of real interest right now on both sides of the aisle in the race is the money situation. Hillary Clinton announcing yesterday that she's raised $45 million for her presidential campaign in the second quarter of this year, which just ended, and that's a lot of money. The pro-Hillary folks said today that if you combine that $45 million in campaign money with the PAC money that she's also raised, that it's more like $70 million that she's raised in the last quarter. It's interesting, though. Everybody has the same deadlines in both parties, right? Everybody knows what their second quarter totals were. Hillary Clinton announced hers right away. But on the Republican side, the candidates have been really, really, really slow to announce how much any of them have raised. They all know. They just haven't said so publicly. The only Republican candidate so far, out of all of those guys, the only one so far who has said what he raised in the second quarter is Ben Carson. And it seems like maybe Dr. Carson has been first out of the gate as a Republican in explaining his numbers because he's got a lot to be proud of in those numbers. Ben Carson didn't get close to Hillary Clinton, but he did raise over $8 million in the last quarter. What his campaign was particularly proud of, though, and it's an important metric, what he was particularly proud of is how many different people sent Ben Carson money last quarter. His campaign spokesperson telling the AP today that no other campaign will come even close to the number of donors that the Ben Carson campaign was able to tap for money in this past quarter. No other campaign will come even close, they say, because more than 150,000 people gave money to Ben Carson in this last quarter. That is a huge number. When I read that quote from the Carson campaign, I thought, they're definitely right. Nobody's going to be able to say they got 150,000 different people to donate to their candidate. I would never guess that anybody else in this race could match that, let alone beat it. That is a huge number of donors. But once again, guess who's surprising everyone? Hi, Bernie. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, seen here last night addressing a crowd of roughly 10,000 people in Madison, Wisconsin. Today, Bernie Sanders' campaign announced its fundraising totals as well for the last quarter. And actually, it's not even for the last quarter because he declared at the end of April. So he's not even declaring numbers for the whole quarter. He's only declaring for 2 months instead of 3 months. But in that 2-month period, Bernie Sanders raised $15 million for his campaign, a number that the New York Times today calls surprisingly large for a fundraising effort that has been primarily from small donors. But even more surprising than the amount of money that Bernie Sanders has raised in a short period of time, even more surprising than the total number, is the number of people who gave him that money. I mean, Ben Carson is bragging, rightfully so, bragging about the fact that he had 150,000 people give him money last quarter. The Ben Carson campaign said today no other campaign will even come close to their number of donors, to their 150,000 donors. Turns out Bernie Sanders had 250,000 donors. So the 2016 campaign is fascinating. It's honestly, as a person in this job, it's really fun to cover. It's so freaking unpredictable on a day-to-day basis. But I think sort of this far into it now, we're starting to see it's operating at a few different levels. And on a day like today, today's news, you could really see it. It's just fascinating to watch at one level what's happening in this giant Republican field, and that's what gets most of the coverage, right? I mean, today another major company dropped its business association with Donald Trump. Serta Mattress dropped him because of the racist and demeaning things that he said about Mexican immigrants. Today, Politico.com published a prominent conservative columnist saying that Donald Trump is right in what he says about Mexicans. So, I mean, the Republican Party has been grappling with what everybody's calling their Donald Trump problem. They've been grappling with it quietly for a while. Now they're starting to grapple with it in public, trying to figure out whether they're going to embrace these positions that he's got that are horrifying the rest of the country. But now he's one of them and he's polling really well. So maybe they have to get on board with what does he say? It's really interesting, right? And there's news like that every day. Like today, this incredibly counterintuitive news is coming out from the fundraising numbers. Ben Carson having these huge numbers, right? And all the other Republicans not saying what they've... There's this fascinating stuff every day. There's this kinetic, day-to-day breaking news every day about what is already an amazing presidential race. And who's in and who's out, what they're trying to get away with and what people are not letting them get away with. It's just rollicking. It's great. That's at this level. At a deeper level, just below that, though, there is this legitimate, manifest, real enthusiasm, which defies all Beltway explanation. It defies all pundit explanation. This huge enthusiasm for the really liberal guy in the race, for Bernie Sanders. If you ask the national pundit class about that, they do not get it at all. But day after day, the Bernie Sanders campaign keeps proving it. They keep continuing to turn out people by the thousands. They continue to show up every other campaign by almost every metric. And the Beltway really just is choosing not to believe it. You almost have to watch the local news in the places where Bernie Sanders is appearing in order to see it happening. But it is really happening. So there's the fascinating stuff sort of happening at the Beltway press level. All that, kinetic day in and day out stuff. At a level deeper than that, there is this stuff that's happening with the Bernie Sanders campaign, which the Beltway doesn't get and which is fascinating. But I said at the start here that there are two great pieces of tape from the news about politics today. And one of those pieces of tape was President Obama having such a good time talking about Uncle Harry in the Republican field, enjoying himself in the politics of this moment today in Wisconsin, right? In the face of the guy who the White House thinks is going to be the Republican nominee. That was great to see. That was one of these two pieces of tape today. The other piece of tape today, though, is from a totally different level at which nobody's talking about politics at all. And it's from actually one of those Republican candidates for president who the president talked about today. And it is the most nonpartisan thing you can possibly imagine in your life. It's one of the most human things I've ever seen a politician do, certainly that I've ever seen a politician allow himself to do while being filmed. This is happening at a level of political discourse that I think we're very uncomfortable with as a country, but is amazing and actually moving to see. This is honestly moving. It's great. It's from a Republican candidate for president. I've never really seen anything like it. And that's next.